how, actually in some ways, how this instrument works. Yes. Because it's as if you're just traveling, and as we said yesterday, the body follows the sound, or the sound follows the body.
Well, I think it's that the body follows the sound. But the way it works is the strings are vibrating in the longitudinal mode, which is never used in, I don't think, in musical instruments. It's an engineering, it's a form of vibration known to engineers in terms of like dealing with resonances and like bridge design. But the longitudinal mode is when I'm causing it to happen by rubbing the string lengthwise, bowing it with rosin. I've got rosin coated on the strings on my hands. And that's setting up a compression wave that travels back and forth between the resonator box and each of these capos stopping the wire. These capos, I worked with some product designers in San Francisco for a year to design this form. It had to be exactly no less weight than what it is, and I'm travel, so I wanted to bring down the weight as much as possible. But these stop the wire. They stop the wave. There's just enough weight to stop it, and so they change the string length. So the vibrating string length is from the resonator to the capo. And what I find particularly interesting about this instrument is that all instruments, string instruments, have a bridge. Guitars and cellos, but not pianos, I guess. But the bridge is at the same location, so the harmonics are patterned in parallel to the bridge, and they're all parallel to each other. And in my case, all of my strings are of different lengths, and so the patterning of the spectrum of harmonics occurs at different times, and so there's a kind of a chaos in terms of partials emerging on one string and a different one emerging on another one as I'm passing across with my fingertips.
So how long did it take you to find those relationships? I mean, I'm sure they're constantly being found, but what was it in that, like, what drew you first to this as a kind of model for an instrument? Because it's certainly not kind for touring. That's, I mean, just to explain, like, what's the weight? Yeah.
Highly.
What's the weight at the end of each of these?
Yeah, so there's 1,760 pounds on each end, and I've determined how much weight is required to keep those platforms from sliding by consulting with my friend Emily Little's brother, who's an engineer, and over the phone, he because we were doing an installation in Austin, and these trays were sliding. Okay, so.
But yeah, so what first drew you to this design? Like, how did it come to you?
Well, it evolved. Like, the first idea was in the 80s. I was like very inspired by the music of Pauline Oliveras, and of course, others like Philip Glass with this sort of continuum, and Terry Riley. And I wanted like a harmonic kind of long duration. I was like really excited by that sound. And working with harmony. And, I discovered this by accident. I was initially inspired by Alvin Lucier's Music on a Long Thin Wire. That operates on a totally different principle. It's an installation, uses an electromagnetic pickup. But it just gave me the idea to explore a long wire, and to see what I could do manipulating it manually. And I did some very unsuccessful things for a long time, until one time I accidentally brushed against the string with my clothing. It had some rosin deposited on the string from my bowing with a traditional bow, which didn't do anything. It sort of made white noise, and that produced a tone, and that set me to explore this.
And so originally you weren't thinking about the kind of longitudinal waves. You were much more interested.
I had no idea. No, I was visual artist, just working with materials, sculptor, just exploring materials intuitively. And I didn't really understand anything technically about this until I moved to New York City. I was living in Minneapolis, moved to New York in search of, because I was witnessing, performances that were say, technically interesting. And I thought, oh, there's got to be some engineer in New York who's, working with people. I'm going to, find somebody who's going to explain this to me how it works, because I tried to tune it by changing the tension or by changing the gauge of the wire. It didn't do anything. It always produced the same pitch, and so I didn't find out how it worked until my friend Arnold Dreiblatt, who's a composer, introduced me to Bob Bilecki, who's a very creative engineer. And Bob met with me, and he said, well, this is the longitudinal mode. The only way you can change the tuning is by changing the length of the string or by the material. And if you notice, there's two materials here. There's steel and there's bronze. And the bronze wire puts out a lower frequency because it's a denser material than the steel. But I like the combination of timbre. They have different timbre. Steel is more pure, but the bronze will give me a lower pitch for the same length as steel. So I just kind of mix it up.
It's interesting, actually, because Bob Bilecki is a kind of recurring theme in this particular festival. For those of you that happen to visit Anaya Lockwood's Wild Energy, Bob Bilecki is, of course, the collaborator on that project also. An incredibly generous human being.
Oh, yeah.
And a real brain.
Anybody who's done anything with sound and technology has gotten some assistance from Bob Bilecki. I mean, pretty much.
It certainly feels like that.
Yeah.
It's got to be ubiquitous. But you've discovered other things along the way. I mean, one just before we kind of move on to the collaboratorial element of this piece, one of these alcoholic rubs here. I mean, it's sort of, it was shocking to me when I first heard it, because I'm familiar with the sound of the instrument, but the timbral change that gives the instrument is extraordinary. And so it's just an alcoholic wipe. That's it.
Yeah, it's an alcohol-soaked cloth. Yeah.
But could you maybe just demonstrate the timbral change?
Well, I mean, you heard it. Let's just use our memory.
Okay. Sure. Okay. It is just like such a different kind of quality to the.
It's smoother.
Yeah, but almost more organ, like a brass note in an organ.
Yeah, continuous.
Yeah. And do you want to also talk to the resonator boxes, because these are also your design?
Yeah. It's a many-year evolution. I first started out with a plywood box, but then I had the idea, if a plywood instrument doesn't, plywood double bass does not sound as good as a hardwood instrument, so why not try, to use better wood in my resonators to improve the timbre. I'm always seeking better timbre through working on technique with how to, touch the strings, but, the kind of wire that I use or how to apply the rosin, all these technical issues, and the resonator design, of course. And so I initially commissioned instrument builders to make things. It was a plywood box with a spruce soundboard, which was an improvement, but then I came to the point where I realized I couldn't commission an instrument builder because I kept having ideas about, minute changes or I couldn't find anyone, but also I couldn't afford, to pay someone to keep building iterations or whatever, and so I just had to do it myself, I taught myself woodworking, and I had some good help. I just looked into a fantastic cabinet maker's shop in Berkeley, and there was one of them who had made guitars, and he gave me a lot of help.
DIY is certainly the echo of your life, I feel.
Yes. I grew up that way. My dad was a DIY architect, totally rebuilt our house, and I grew up, as his assistant, and, so, yeah. A lot of artists are.
Yeah.
Right?
So how did this collaboratorial relationship start? Because it's 2 works deep, well, almost 2.5 works deep, let's say, now. How did you connect to each other?
Yeah, well, we started playing in about 2006 and just got together, in the San Francisco Bay Area music scene.
Mills College.
Yeah, and so we had been playing a lot in kind of more improvisatorial settings, and then finally decided to try to really craft a composition together. And through working with Ellen, I really also began to explore like the overtone series and all the harmonics on the instrument of the cello, because that's not really typically taught in classical pedagogy. And so through mapping all of that and trying to understand it better and continuing to understand it better, we began composing a piece which became Harbors, our first collaborative composition. And following that, we've just kind of continued to discover more through this piece, Soundless.
I mean, it's for those that aren't familiar, the Harbors is available as a recording. And, in fact, we have a demonstration copy right here. You can purchase it in the gift shop. So it's, in my mind anyway, it's quite a different work to Soundless. Like, I think there are certain relationships that maybe are started as a conversation in Harbors that somehow are extended in Soundless. What do you feel is the kind of the trajectory between the two?
I feel we really began by trying to explore more extended harmonic territories. And so through mapping out, when we say extended, every tone can generate a series of overtones. And so that's just something naturally occurring. And when you go further and further out into the harmonic series, those harmonies kind of become, to our ears, like just more unusual. And so I think in this piece, we were trying to kind of find comfortable and find new areas in those sounds that we hadn't explored yet. And then all the other techniques and the introduction of the shoveler, this wooden tool that Ellen created, and the electric guitar to kind of expand the vocabulary of strings.
Well, since you've mentioned the electric guitar, which I have to admit, completely obsessed with, do you want to just talk how you've... I mean, because it's basically completely rewriting the rules of the electric guitar. That's pretty much what you've done.
Yeah, so it's kind of an accident. I'm primarily a cellist and a vocalist, but I was commissioned to write a piece for an ensemble that included electric guitar, and so I wasn't getting very far with MIDI, and I said, I need to just buy a guitar. And sure enough, I was just totally inspired by playing it, and a lot of what I've been aiming to do on the cello is just like, oh, it just happens so easily because that instrument is meant to be amplified. And through all these years of trying to amplify an acoustic instrument, which is very complex and very resonant, it's very difficult to amplify because the feedback just happens so quickly. So when I started playing electric guitar, I just felt like, oh, this is like the other sound that I've been wanting to go towards. And I just fell in love with it and kept playing, kept using it. And then I thought, well, what would this sound like with Ellen's instrument? And of course, it was just from there we wanted to just keep developing it. So I've re-fretted it. So I've taken out all the frets with the help of a dear friend, Sudu Tawari, who's an amazing instrument builder. And because those frets are in equal temperament, which is like a 12-tone system, typical in Western music, I've decided to create a tuning system that is flexible because I don't want to settle on something until I know what it feels like, what it sounds like. And so I'm just using zip ties here, which are very practical, functional, and economical. And so I'm using a tuning system that I can change, I can modify, and perhaps eventually have a fretboard made, but perhaps not. I think it's kind of nice to always be able to change. So
I'm curious about, because the thing for me is it is such a natural conversation that's struck between, particularly, I mean, I think both the cello and the guitar lend themselves towards this, obviously because you've been able to, I guess, reconcile how to extract a certain kind of timbre and harmonic information out of the instruments. But I was really surprised by how the relationship and the kind of sympathy that the amplified sound and the instruments themselves actually were able to maintain. I think that's something that's worth maybe spending a moment on, is recognizing the other player, or players, which I guess is the sound system in the room, and how you build that dialogue, and actually acknowledging Richard's work in this space, which is a round of applause for Richard, please, everyone.
Thank you to Richard Bugg, wonderful sound engineer from Meyer Sound, and thank you to Meyer Sound for providing this fantastic system.
Yeah, because it really does, it opens up another possibility for conversation between things. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yes. Well, the studio that we work in is a smaller space, and I work acoustically there. Theresa amplifies the guitar, but not the cello, or sometimes you put it through the... Okay. But, yeah, I mean, what we're looking for is a kind of merging of the instruments. I'm tuned, actually, to the open strings of the cello and its harmonics. So we're working to like blend the instruments together. But we also are working with what happens when a frequency is put into a space where my instrument is, that causes my instrument to just kind of open out. You can hear timbral changes when there's a harmony in the room that's in relation to it. We call that effect bloom. But then I've read that it's actually a scientific term. Like it's, for that phenomenon when there's sympathetic resonances. Yeah, so we're looking for that. It's a really interesting feeling.
Well, it's interesting because, as I said, I've had the pleasure to hear this piece now 4 times. And this iteration is so vastly, in my opinion, vastly developed to that first iteration, because it's as if you've got control over that extra body in the room somehow.
The sound system.
Yeah.
Yeah, today, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think as well, just the relationship between volume and things like that seem to be that much more. It's like I could really sense the listening in the piece.
Yes. We could really play it. We could play the room today.
Yeah. And it's always new. So every room, every situation, every audience makes the piece different because, the air is literally vibrating differently.
We've learned a lot here. I mean, every concert is a learning experience.
Yeah. There are two more things I just want to talk about because I realize we're starting to get short on time. One is about the score. Like, how is it that because it's such a, for me anyway, it feels like such a fluid exchange. But obviously you have these movements that you sort of step through. How is it that you kind of develop that structure?
Well, we initially developed it. I decided that, tuning this instrument is really a lot of work and it's just cumbersome. And so I thought I need to develop some sort of MIDI type situation to design, just the framework of a compositional sequence. So I made, using an iPad, a screen matrix of the tunings, which it's up to I don't know, it's about 100 or so pitches in an octave, but and I used the sample of my instrument, so I had all these colorations and choices of pitch. And Theresa and I sat down together with this, and we said, okay, let's start with this chord, and we punched the buttons. We even could record that, the sampler, and just think, okay, do we want to hear this tonality, then that, then that, then that? And so we just kind of intuitively worked to create a sequence, and all the time trying to push ourselves into a more extended harmony, as Theresa said. We just wanted to do it.
But there's a kind of feedback cycle in that as well, as I guess as you introduce things in, that you come back and it's a sort of iterative process.
Yeah, and that comes through playing a lot. So we're composing, playing, recording, listening, composing, playing, recording all the time. editing and recomposing things. So,
And does do you feel that one instrument leads the other, or is it much more of a dialogue now?
I think it's both. I think sort of techniques can lead, ideas can lead, or harmonies can lead. It's all in there, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of moods in different areas of the piece, and which kind of dictate the way it's played. It's just sort of, it's telling us what to do. There's areas where I feel, I need a softer tone, Theresa's sound comes out more. There's, it's just sort of like the piece, as we worked on it, told us what to do with dynamics.
Well, look, we'll definitely take some questions if you folks are up for it. Just before we get there, though, I have one final anecdote.
I know what's coming.
I believe you once were visited upon by Elvis, and I think it's a story you should maybe share.
Well, okay. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1957. And in 1958, when I was 1, Elvis was on leave, he served, and he was stationed in Germany. He came back to Memphis in 1958, and I was 1, and there was this kind of ice cream shop that everyone went to, and just one time my family was there, and he was there, and my dad was holding me, and they told me, and I was 1. Okay, so can you guess what Elvis said to me when I was 1? He said, "Hiya, baby." It's true. He did.
And then you got a kiss from the king, and then it was on your way.
My hand.
I just wanted you to tell that story. I love that story so much. Folks, do you have any questions for Ellen? Okay. And I can maybe pass a microphone over, or maybe if you got it, try your big voice if anyone does have a question. Oh, we've got a mic. Okay, well, who would like to ask a question? Are there any?
Well, bending is okay. I mean, it's meant to bend because when it's under tension, and then that cinches up, and when things are under tension, they resonate. Bending is okay. It's not gonna. It has broken though. Like earlier, I would say, it was like 30 years ago that we were doing some experiments and made them too thin. And one time I arrived at my studio and it was exploded on the floor in splinters. Yeah.
So is this piece pretty set, or are there improvisations or changes when you play it?
We don't know. We have to listen to this recording and then maybe we'll...
No, I mean, it's structured, so it's both really precise and both really open. So the score has like incredible detail as far as like which notes are being played, what palette, what techniques, but within each section, it's not like scored like a normal musical score where every second is accounted for. It's more like, this is the material that's going to happen in this section. And within that, we use improvisation because depending on the room, depending on what's resonating, depending on the interaction between our instruments, that kind of opens up things that we can't expect. So I think it's like a really, tight combination of both, the really precise and really open.
Best of both worlds.
Yeah, we want it all.
Is there another question?
Thanks for a beautiful performance. I really enjoyed it. Can you describe what it actually feels like in terms of like the tactile feel to play this instrument? Even with the different tools as well, but mostly on your forward C.
Well, it kind of feels like a dream, or it feels like I'm floating, gliding. I'm following, the harmonic changes along the length, and just, I don't know how to explain it, but it's kind of floating.
Thank you.
Would you mind speaking a little bit more about the title and what kind of significance that has for the piece?
I'll let Theresa cover that.
So the title comes from one of my favorite Taoist writers from the 12th century named Sun Bu-er. And there's a line of her poetry is all about sort of inner alchemy, especially for women and sort of transformation. And there's a line that says, "In the soundless is the ultimate pleasure all along." And the soundless is like a metaphor in Taoism for the limitless, or the void. All right, so in the void is all possibilities, and soundless is the limitless. And so for us, that title, it kind of conjures this feeling of, well, not just the limitless possibilities of sound, but the limitless of us as people and connecting and being together. And so just feels very kind of, it encompasses a lot.
But I also feel the wonder of the universe, because the wonder of the sound, that this produces is really based on scientific principles. It's just something that pre-exists. And I'm just experiencing it, what is already there,
And I have to add too, I feel that the last couple of years that we've been writing this, there have been so many positive and kind of catastrophic things happening in the world,
yes,
in our own lives. And so Soundless, for me, also resonates as something absolutely blissful or absolutely devastating, right? If you think, if that city were soundless, it could be totally peaceful, or it could just mean it's obliterated. And I just, that really, it just strikes home, because
we're all living with that
everywhere.
dichotomy.
Yeah, every day, and yeah.
Folks, Ellen Fullman, Theresa Wong, give them a war room.
I would want to also just give a special thank you to Lawrence English and Room 40 for commissioning this piece, and to Mocha, and to Amelia Charter, and to Fulcrum, Robert Takaishi, and just everyone who's been so wonderful, Richard Bugg, and this amazing team here. We couldn't have done it without you all.
It's incredible to be presented in this context, just with such care taken in every detail, and we so appreciate it.
You deserve it.
Oh.
Thank you, everyone.